Rob's there. Al. Let's unmute David when we get a chance. We got Bill, David Herman, Charlie, Dennis.
Howdy, YouTube.
Good to see everybody. Happy birthday, Charlie. Day late.
Oh, happy birthday, Charlie.
He went out and shot some big waves for his birthday at Shore Acres. Sent me a photo. Looked cool.
We got Bill, David Herman, Charlie.
Okay, we got YouTube's audio popping through on the delay.
Good to see everybody.
Okay, we're off and running.
Happy birthday, Charlie. Day late.
Whose audio's on?
Hey, Charlie.
Woody.
Somebody's YouTube audio's on.
Always
Like
me.
we're good. Okay.
Woody.
Cool. All right. We don't need to hear what I said 20 seconds ago. All right, everybody. Good to see everyone. Welcome to this December office hours. I hope everybody is safe and healthy and staying creative. I see there's some new faces in here, so I'm going to have Woody kind of run down our little sort of system that we have here for the office hours we've developed over the months.
Yeah. So we ask that everyone pre-register if possible at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. And we do this every couple of weeks where we alternate between question and answers, answering people's photography questions, and we invite up to 100 photographers onto Zoom. And then everyone else is asked to watch on YouTube on the simulcast. So if you have a question, just plunk it into the chat of your choice, whatever platform you're on, and we'll try to get to it. Or you can always register in advance. Again, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Put that question in the form there, and we can plan a little bit around your question. Then alternating weeks, we also do photo submissions or little projects and fun things along the way. So if you're new, maybe check back in a couple weeks and we may have the next thing up. Who knows what it will be? We always come up with last minute ideas. So other than that, it's posted to YouTube afterwards. You can watch the rebroadcast or restream anytime you want. Just go to Hudson's YouTube channel and you can find it on there. I don't have anything else. That's it.
Yeah, we keep everybody muted unless there's a reason to unmute somebody, just because you can't have 30, 40 people talking at the same time or it gets catastrophic on these platforms. But we have David Archer and Rick LePage and Darren and Woody here, all unmuted, sort of moderating and running and answering questions. And today is really just sort of Q&A. You know, I've got some photos that I can pull up and share a screen if we have a technical question and need to talk about some editing thing. But we're mainly just going to run through, do a bit of, I see DC and Tony showed up. Good to see you guys. So yeah, we'll just do some Q&A. And I don't know, Woody, did you just mention, I was kind of multitasking, that the next office hours we're talking about is January 5th, and we're gonna talk long exposure.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that'll be up. The form to sign up will be up. Maybe if I can get a moment during this, I might put it up right now, but you'll be able to go to the website and register real soon for that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So Rick, do you want to run questions?
So we have a whole bunch of questions this week on the Z series, which we'll save till a little bit later, just so that we're not boring everybody with the constant Z6, Z7, Z62, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. We've got a bunch of printing questions, which will also bore a bunch of people. So I'll hold off on some of those. So Stuart asked a question about sort of the new Apple M1s and sort of what are we thinking about them and what's coming and all that sort of stuff. I've actually been working with Dennis, one of our piano project folks, about, which one to buy, that sort of thing. You're running on an old MacBook Pro 13, right?
Me? Yeah. No, it's a 15 with the
15,
processor,
right?
And quite a bit, and as much RAM as I could get at the time, 16 gigabytes. But
yeah,
my biggest complaint with the thing for just on the road workflow and stuff is this keyboard is just, I've kept it around by having kind of a protective cover on it and not getting any dust or crumbs in it, but it's just not a great keyboard.
Yeah. So for those of you out there who know a little or not much at all, so Apple is moving away from the Intel platform to their own chips, machines that they basically chips that they started with the iPad and the iPhone, and they've sort of moved over to a whole new generation. And they announced 3 different computers: a MacBook Pro 13-inch, MacBook Air 13-inch, and Mac Mini. And they're all sort of the first generation. They've been out for a while. They've got this, from everybody I've talked to who has one, they've got this thing called Rosetta, which is sort of translation software that will let you run most older applications coded for the Intel platform on the M1 chip. And as far as we're concerned, right now, Photoshop, Lightroom Classic all run in the Rosetta environment. Actually, Lightroom just came out with an update that is native to the M1, and with Photoshop and Lightroom Classic coming in January. I talked to our good friend Duncan the other day. He's got an M1 MacBook, and he says he notices no difference between his older MacBook Pro 13 and the new M1 MacBook Pro 13 running Lightroom. So
except battery life, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are many things that make it look like this new platform will be really great. But there are also a bunch of questions. Right now, none of the M1 machines can take more than 16 gigabytes of RAM. They don't have a dedicated graphics processor, and it's unclear as to what that's going to be like in the future. When Dennis and I were talking about it over email last week, you know, if you're looking for portability, those new MacBook Air M1s look great. You know, battery life, performance is all great. Apple has said that both RAM and graphics processing will be different with the M1 machines, with the M-class machines, than with the older Intel machines. And we don't quite know what that means, to be honest. So for me, you know, I mean, I keep a foot in the PC world and I keep a foot in the Mac world. I'm working on a Mac laptop, but I have a PC desktop. And now that Windows 10 is just so much better than the older versions of Windows, I don't have much problem doing that. But, you know, I would really hesitate to buy an older Intel-based Mac, just because you can see the writing on the wall that they're going to be designing everything for their new M1 in the near future. And so I feel like, you know, holding on if you've got something is probably a wise decision right now. Do you agree with that, Rick? Well, you're talking to someone who bought the MacBook 16 in September. Well, but I actually, I mean, I bought it for, to me, valid reasons. I was replacing an 8-year-old iMac that was basically falling apart. I need to have a portable, and I wanted a portable with dedicated video card, fast processor, and I wanted RAM. You know, I wanted to be able to I got 32 gigs of RAM in that MacBook 16, and it'll last me. I mean, the last one, the last MacBook Pro I had, the 15, same one you had, we bought around the same time. But the keyboard was just horrible. My keyboard was literally falling apart. So, I have this little plastic protector, and I think that's the only reason mine is not falling apart. I've never taken it off since the day I bought it. So, I mean, for me, you know, I do, you know, I'm a photographer, but I'm also a book publisher. You know, my world is based on Adobe's world, right? You know, I use InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, Lightroom. And I know for a fact that those will be compatible with the next 2 versions of Mac OS, and you know, I need to have that. So I thought about holding out for the M1s until I heard that there wasn't really going to be a Pro class machine. So, you know, I'm thinking about setting up a print studio, and the new M1 Mac Mini would be a perfect machine for that. But again, I'm gonna hold off for a while. The one caveat I know about the new Macs with the M1 chips in them are that printing is still an issue. You know, especially with if you're doing photo printing, the Epson drivers are not up to speed yet. I don't know about the Canon drivers. You know, most apps that I've heard of, including on one, will run in Rosetta. I don't believe on one has an M1 version coming in the next month or so, but I could be wrong on that. So.
All right. Well, now we've bored the PC users to death. So.
Well.
No, I'm kidding. So you got to pick poison sort of. We'll move around a little bit.
So, well, Rob asked about this upcoming great conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter. We saw a couple of people mentioning that.
Right.
His question is, what focal length lens would you use for something like this? So.
Gosh, so I've had a number of questions about that, and I actually owe a couple people emails. I've just been sort of scrambling between holidays and family and some projects I'm on. But I think that it's a tough one. I think about planets in landscape shots that I do with the Milky Way or stars or blue hour stars. They're always these, big bright stars. They stand out. They look like really bright stars. And it'd be interesting to get a landscape shot, maybe if there's a tiny bit of the Milky Way, or if you happen to be someone that's in the southern hemisphere, you probably got great Milky Way right now. To put them in the Milky Way or in the tail of the Milky Way. Otherwise, it's not as if you could do a long lens shot with them together and get details of the planets. There's still going to be just bright points of light in a star field. So for me, finding some kind of a landscape shot, if you don't have access to the Milky Way, make it kind of a blue houry star shot where the stars are just coming out and you've kind of just got the constellations standing out strong, and then have those two planets bright in the scene. They're going to be sort of white points of brighter light. So I think it's a wide angle, interesting landscape shot. And if you can figure out a time with a new moon and Milky Way showing at least a little bit, it's going to help your scene.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I've got that shot of the Joshua Tree with Venus, sort of in the sky. I know it's Venus because I was there and I shot it that day, but not a single person's gonna know that it was Venus. I'd literally have to tell them. It just looks like a small, slightly larger than pinprick, but still. So I think that's the exact thing. It's that you're going to get an image that has these two close together points of bright light, and you can make a beautiful landscape image with the night sky. And I sort of talked about two different images at once, and I probably didn't differentiate enough. I think you've got that blue hour shot when the constellations are just coming out, and you're going to have your two really bright points for the planets, and you can figure out where you're going to put that in your scene. Or you've got a dark night sky with a little bit of Milky Way on a new moon kind of night. But you're going to have to explain to somebody what's interesting about the photo. It's not going to be that Jupiter and Saturn being so close together jumps out and they're like, wow, you've got a conjunction photo. I mean, it's not like that full moon setting with a long lens behind something that's out at infinity, and it's a beautiful image. It's just going to be cool to you. I've got actually images from this last summer where Jupiter and Saturn are in the tail of the Milky Way as it reaches down to my landscape scene, and it's super cool. As I'm like, oh, that's Jupiter and Saturn. They've been getting closer and closer together through this summer and fall. So yeah, I mean, it's something cool to go out and shoot. You still need to have an interesting photograph.
Yeah.
So. Well, on the subject of shooting, our dear friend Jason had an interesting question. What are your favorite subjects or favorite locations to shoot in dead of winter? He says, many of us fall off on our excitement level to go out and shoot when the vibrant colors fade. What keeps you inspired to get out in the cold and keep shooting? Is it better to explore local, or are the winter locations just too good not to make the drive to see?
I live in Portland, Oregon, and it's rare. We usually get a snow event a year, but whenever it snows here, I like to get out and photograph my city in that different way that the snowfall makes. I think street shooting on snowy city streets right after it's fallen and before it's gotten turned all dirty by the cars, that first morning after the snow falls, or that night that it's just fallen. I love to do city scenes, and if you live out in the country, rural scenes in snow are just beautiful. Everything changes.
And one of the things that you get a lot in winter, whether you're in a snowy climb or just a cold climate is you get fog.
Yeah.
You know, you and I have been out to Sauvie Island Channel on a couple of January mornings when it's been very cold and foggy, and you know, we've gotten some amazing photographs out there. You know, some of it is thinking about a muted palette, you know, that it's a different type of thing, you know, and you can shoot in the blue hour, you can shoot later in the day earlier. You don't have to be out there at 9 o'clock at night, you know, like you do in the middle of the summer.
You just stole the words out of my mouth. Blue hour is suddenly at dinner time, and you get rush hour traffic at blue hour if you live in a place with traffic too. So you can do, we're talking about long exposure next week. If you can get up and you live near a interstate or interchange or something with traffic, everybody's going home at 5 o'clock and it's blue hour in the winter. You can get out in a beautiful place and blur all the red and white lights moving along the freeway, and you'll have that traffic. Whereas in the middle of summer, when you might want to do that when it's nice and warm and comfortable, it's 10 o'clock at night and nobody's out driving. So, you know, there are interesting things to do. And like Rick said, you get that beautiful light and blue hour earlier in the day, so you don't have to stay up late at night to do it. You know, there's benefits to winter. And I love to go up in the mountains. You know, if you live near mountains and they're getting snow, even if your city doesn't get any snow, it's just great to go up in the mountains and photograph sunset on the peaks with fresh snow. Get that purple alpine glow after the sun sets. And there's lots to do.
Sandy, you know, in terms of going places, not going anywhere this year, but Sandy talks about Yellowstone in the winter, and that's been on my list. I'd actually kind of thought maybe I would try and do that in January this year, but that's not going to happen.
Buy down, get big puppy down hood too. It's cold in Yellowstone in winter. Usual. So, there's some locations I would love to go in winter. Actually, I'd like to go to Moab in winter, and you know, take some crampons in case and hike up to Delicate Arch and shoot that in the snow, and go to do sunrise at Mesa Arch in the snow with not a giant crowd there in frigid conditions. You know, my good friend John Escott always has this great saying that there's really no bad weather. There's just inadequate clothing.
Yep. All right. Okay. So you did an ATS, was it last week or the week before, about using Nikon's new ES2 system to digitize slides and negatives. And our good friend DC had a question saying he watched the video about it, and he has a 90mm Sony macro. He says, could he use this lens with the ES2 system, assuming that he could find one to purchase? And if so, what size extension tube would he need to attach the lens to make the equivalent to a 60mm macro? I don't know about, can you, is there a mount? Is there an adapter that will turn the, or it's basically what DC is talking about is flipping the lens around to put it on the 62mm filter.
Well, you could adapt it to 62mm filter thread to the ES2 and throw an extension tube in, and it will work. I've heard plenty of people doing that with 105s from various brands. I mean, you can get it to work. But Rick has a good point that if you're spending all that money, he's got to.
I've actually
on this at some point.
I've been working DC on the same thing, only from the Sony perspective, and so what I did was I bought a copy stand, which basically is just a flat board with a pillar out of it and a crank that has a Arca Swiss mount on it. And then straight down. And then I bought one of these things, which is it's called the Kaiser Slim Light Plano. I'll put links in the chat. And I've done a little bit of testing with the 90mm. The nice thing about using the copy stand is you can pretty much raise and lower it however you need to. I bought a couple of I can't remember. They're basically clips to put your negatives in. And I've done a bunch of shooting with them, and I find that this works really well. The little LED light source is just great.
Yeah.
So
I just ordered one of those from B&H just to review negatives because I have a whole bunch I want to scan.
yeah.
The old light table that I was using when I did that video, I realized just how crappy it was. I was trying to make a video of it, and you just see these bands of light moving through because it's such a poor light source.
But I mean, the copy, I bought a copy stand because I was copying some books. So it's one that had small lights looking down on it. But you can get a solid light stand for, I mean, $150, I think, you know, that's got a long enough column that you can get up with the lens. But
I do a lot of that stuff with a magic arm and a Matthews stand. I mean, for people that have access to a studio, you can mount your camera pointed straight down to the table with a setup like that. Big heavy duty stand and an arm that takes your camera out and you just point it straight down. And then that little light board, I think one of the neat things about that is that you could easily do 4x5 or medium format film with that too, because the ES2 is limited to just 35mm negatives and slides. Now, granted, that we'll have tons of and need, but
one of the reasons I went this way was because I have a whole bunch of medium format slides that I want to scan, you know. Chromes from the 80s and 90s. So
as do I. So I think I'm going to experiment with that myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Cool.
But we're talking about doing something with that as well. Because it's definitely something that comes up quite frequently.
Oh, David's got a kitty. For those of you who want to see everybody, if you're new to the Zoom meetings and you haven't done, if you move your mouse up to the sort of top right corner of your view, there's speaker view or grid view, and the grid view will give you, or the gallery view. Gallery view gives you a view of everybody, which is nice. So that's how we're seeing what everybody's doing at the same time.
Well, I'll take another question from a Sony shooter, from Bill. Bill said he gifted himself with a new to him Sony A9 and a 24-105 f4G as a general purpose lens. For wider shooting, would you recommend a general purpose wide zoom lens supplement by a dedicated fast wide lens for astrophotography? I mean, I would say it all depends on what type of shooting you really want to do. You know, I have the 16-35 f4, but my main wide angle lens for the Sony is actually my old Canon 16-35 2.8L, which is still, to me, my favorite lens of all time. Sony has come out with a 12-24 2.8 that is astronomically expensive for me. But I am actually thinking of renting one once they're available to sort of see if it's something that could replace that 16-35. Because that lens, the Canon lens, is actually still a little bit valuable out there. So, you know, but
they want for that 12-24.
$3,000.
Yeah, so they're in the same.
You know, it depends. I mean, I shoot a lot in that 18-20 range. Because the Canon works so well for me, I haven't bothered to go into the. Canon makes a 20mm f1.8 that's got decent reviews. I know a couple people who have it, who like it. There's the Zeiss Batis 18mm 2.8, which is a little bit more expensive. It's about $1,300 right now. But that's a great lens. I mean, our friend Brian Matish loves that lens. I think Matt also uses it. You know,
it's interesting on the astro angle. I mean, I've sort of chased that with. I was looking at what is the best ultra wide, really fast lens to get clean exposures, and and then you start playing around with the different rules, the MPF rule versus the 500 rule, and your shutter speeds are getting shorter and shorter, and you start realizing you're spending more and more money on these giant heavy lenses. And for me, buying that Star Tracker this summer and trying out a couple of them and finding that for a reasonably sized wide angle lens and mirrorless camera or even a DSLR camera, that little move, shoot, move $200 star rotator suddenly makes it so that you don't need to have the fastest wide angle lens. You just need one that's sharp and doesn't have much coma or chromatic aberration. And suddenly that opens up a world of doing astrophotography with slightly cheaper, smaller glass. So that's something to think about. That's been my big revelation, is that, you know, all of a sudden you could do astrophotography with an f4 lens. Charlie was doing it with me down at Secret Beach north of Brookings. You know, he gets 5-minute exposures. So, you know, if you leave the lens cap on and run one and then do 5-minute exposure and 5-minute long exposure noise reduction, suddenly you're like 10 minutes later, you realize you've made a mistake. But, you know,
right.
But I think that, you know, I was finding that I'm not looking at those Zeiss really, really fast, you know, fantastic lenses anymore. Or even with my new 14 to 24 2.8, I'm going to throw it on that star tracker and do longer exposures. And you know, I think it opens up your world of possibilities if you love to do astro with what wide angle lens do I get, thinking about just spending a couple $100 on a star tracker instead of maybe a couple $1,000 on the lens that you want for astro.
Yeah. I would, my recommendation, Bill, would be to go for the 20 millimeter 1.8 to start with, and just sort of that'll give you a decent wide angle lens. It's a nice size prime. And then, you know, it's a question of, do you really want to go even wider than that? You know?
Well, and with the A9's noise profile and that 1.8, if that thing is clean in the edges and doesn't have coma, it'll be wonderful for astro.
Yeah.
Even without a tracker, you know, you just limit yourself to maybe 25 seconds and ramp up the ISO, or 20 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing you can do is you can play around with the Rokinons. You know, the Rokinon 14s are fun lenses to use. They're decent for astro. They're not the sharpest lenses out there, but, you know, I've gotten some great shots with them over the years, and they're fun to play with.
The SP version, the 2.4 SP, was pretty nice. I have that Nikon one. I'm actually going to sell it because I don't need it anymore, but it was pretty good for a while.
Yeah. So, that helpful, Bill? I hope.
We got a thumbs up. I'm glad you got that camera, Bill. You deserve that upgrade. That's going to be a lot of fun for you.
Yeah. Yep. Tony asks about using the histogram and the zebra functions. He says that the zebra registers the image as too bright. When just looking at the histogram, there's still room on the right side of the screen.
Absolutely. So I'd say just a couple things, but I think zebra stripes are wonderful when you're doing video, because often when you're doing video, maybe you're doing some camera movements, whether you're on a fluid head or handheld, and videographers love to see those zebra stripes pop up in their frame to know, ooh, because, you know, a high-end filmmaker doesn't want to use any kind of automatic exposure. They don't want the frame darkening or changing. They're using a set white balance and a set exposure. And so it tells them, oh, we need to cut and readjust exposure and reshoot this. For stills, you know, I tend to just watch the histogram and check my exposures. And you also have to know that the histogram that's being built on the back of your camera, whatever camera you're working with, the histogram is based on the JPEG that's rendered to show the image on the back of your camera. It's not really a representation of the actual raw file. So, you know, I find myself, I know that I can go a third or 2/3 of a stop over where it shows the histogram hitting the right edge if I need to, and it's going to still be savable in post. You kind of get an idea of what that histogram looks like with the JPEG profile that you have set. And I shoot all my stuff in natural, or what is it? Flat, I think, is the profile I shoot, because it gives you a little bit better representation. If you choose vivid or even standard, it tends to kind of compress the histogram to get it looking a little bit more beautiful on the back of the camera screen. The JPEG that it renders is a little bit more contrasty, and so it actually makes the histogram look like it's cut off when it really isn't. So, you know, you have to kind of learn, how does the raw histogram, when I get back and put this in my editing software, compare to the histogram I'm seeing out in the field? And I would turn off the zebra stripes for still shooting. I think it's just distracting.
Yeah.
That's my personal take on it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
And anybody that, if you guys have questions or follow-ups from what we're talking about, or new topic suggestions, just throw them in the chat too.
Yep.
Whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Zoom, we got Darren checking YouTube. And
so we talked about this yesterday from Mike. Said, has there ever been a winning photograph in a contest you thought, what are they seeing that I'm not? Or is beauty in the eye of the beholder? This is sort of in reference to photo critiques and stuff like that. And it's a very interesting question.
That's a really good question. I have
to drink water before you start.
It's funny. I've done slideshows to big groups over the years, and it's like we were talking about with the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. You can go out and shoot something that's meaningful to you, but when you show it to someone, they're not sure what the subject is. It's a beautiful night sky photo. You say, oh, that's Jupiter and Saturn. Well, that's interesting and that's cool. But sometimes there are images that are just composed and lit just right. And the minute that you throw them up on a screen for an auditorium full of people, the whole room goes, and those are, it's that special combination of things. And I think that not very many images reach that. I did a big trip in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and I was shooting both digital and stills. And I did that slideshow a lot because the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is sort of such a hot political topic. And I did shows for the Sierra Club and, different organizations. And I used to have about 100 slides. And then I was invited to my friends, John and Eva's in the Hudson Valley in New York to do their annual slideshow. It's a bunch of National Geo retiree photographers and a bunch of, people, important people, but fun people that they invite for a photo show every year. And they'll have 3 people present. And she said 20 slides maximum. And I was like, and she wanted me to do Anwar. And I thought, well, how do I take a 100 slide show down to 20? And then I started thinking about what are the slides that people in the room reacted to. And instead of trying to hit every point in the story with an image, just slimming my story down and picking the 20 best images, that slideshow was so much better. I've never given it as the bigger slideshow again. And I think that one of the things as you progress in your photography, you'll start noticing which images catch people's attention. And it isn't necessarily the ones that are the most important to you. We all have a personal connection with the image that we created that doesn't necessarily translate through to the casual observer. And I think that there are images that the more you progress in this pursuit, and you talk to friends and family members and go to workshops and we share images around. And that's one of the things I love the most in the workshops is looking at everybody's images each day. I think the more that you share your work with others and see their reactions, the more you'll begin to be shaped by how other people perceive your images. And that isn't to say that there is certainly subjectivity in taste, and different people have different images appeal to them more than others. I mean, I have done work for clients where I was absolutely certain, these are the best images. These are the ones that represent their product the best, or what they're trying to say, their ethos. And then, their art director takes a look and totally picks 5 images that are completely different than the ones that I thought were the best. Or in contests, sometimes you win with the image that you thought wasn't your best, and they don't even look at the one you thought was your best. So, and there is a certain amount of subjectivity, but I think that part of what your journey as a photographer, honing your craft, should be is paying attention to what resonates with people, and being able to do something neutrally. I studied law and practiced law for a while before I was a photographer. And one of the things they just drill into you is trying to take yourself out of the given situation and look at things from both sides, to try to kind of be a disembodied observer without your own prejudices and judgments. And I think that as a photographer, the more you can learn to do that about your own imagery, the better you'll be. Rick, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
No,
Going
I
off
think
on-
I'll leave it. I'll leave it. Other than to say that you know, whenever you know, Mike was talking about a contest, and you know, a contest is all about the judging, not about the best photographs.
Yep.
You know, I think we run into trouble when we start thinking about, you know, what's the best photograph. You know, I know many people who they look at a landscape photograph and it could be one that we all think is amazing, one that we think is okay, and they look at it and just go, it doesn't speak to them.
Right.
You know, that there is, you know, my joke all these years has been art is just a man's name. You know, that it means different things to different people. Different, you know, art speaks to people in many different ways, which is why there's not just one type of art out there. You know, I think for photography, part of it is learning the language of photography itself, how to look at an image impassionately, you know, and understand how it works and why it works. You know, this is, you know, why I'm a big proponent of at least paying some attention to photo history and looking at work of, you know, as many photographers as you can, especially curated work, because that's work that's at least past one further level in terms of vocabulary.
Yep.
But, you know, a large part of all of this is, you know, trying to find your style, you know, what speaks to you, and you know, not so much in a way of copying other people, but in a, you know, what are the types of things that I like to shoot, and why do I like to shoot them? And then you sort of come at that with a level of authenticity that helps inform the photographs that you take. Doesn't mean you're always going to be taking great photographs, but you know, understanding how you look at a scene and how you shoot it is just as important.
And then also being sort of ruthless in the culling of your own work in the wake of being out. I mean, I think that
I am
I'm
in that process right now.
But and that goes for each shoot, and then each season, and then each year, and then the years as a whole. It's a constant work in progress. You know, I go back and I have work that I thought was great 5 years ago, and I go, oh, and I'll look through the culls from 5 years ago and say, wow,
yes,
there's one I should have worked on. That's beautiful. Let's pull that into modern software and work at it. You know, I think revisiting your old work with a critical eye is a really important part of the entire process. Yeah,
every December and January, I do a project where I take a year and I go through it with a fine-tooth comb, you know, 2008, 2014, and I will look at every image that's left in my library, and I will go through again and look at, you know, are they still worth doing? You know, they're still worth being in my library. This year I'm doing something a little different, which is I'm restarting my portfolio from scratch. And the end result is that I'm going to have a 16 by 20 inch print of every image that's in my portfolio. So if someone wants to see it, someone that I'm with, I can actually show them a print, because the print is for me, is what's most important. And it's a daunting project. I mean, it's going to take me I'm not going to finish it till mid-January, I'm sure, you know, and that's just pulling portfolios, not the printing part. So, but it's an exercise that I suggest, you know, lots of people do, especially if you've got, you know, a library with tens of thousands of images in it, you know, understanding. I mean, one of the great things about it is you get to see your progress as a photographer over time. And, you know, there's a lot of, oh my God, I can't believe that I shot, you know, this scene this way. God, could I be back there? But you also find a lot of things where you're like, wow, this is actually not a bad image. So yeah.
Hey, Gary, I just saw Gary pop up and connect to audio. All right.
Let's see. Hakan, what is your preferred lens for photographing kite and windsurfers?
Well, in surfing in general, I think sports where you're set back a ways from someone, the longest high quality lens you can afford. You know, I when I'm going out to shoot kite surfing, I take that 500 PF. That's the lens I want most of the time. Now, you know, if you've got someone that you're working with and you can direct them to come up close and you trust them, you know, I have a couple of kiters I know who are just incredible. And sometimes I'll take the 14 to 24 and have them, you know, jump right over me standing in shallows. So it depends, but in general, if you're going to someplace and you don't know the community, most people are going to be a ways out away from you when they do the cool stuff and having a big long lens. And one thing that's interesting with kite surfing and the wind sports are, I think a lot of people, they want to get that shot with the kite because it's so cool and the person, and there's no way to kind of convey the physicality of it if you've got the kite and the person in the frame because they're 22 meters apart. So you can get a couple of those landscape style shots that are like establishing frames of what's going on and then get in as close and tight as you can on the person with the bar and the lines going out of the frame. You know, you want to fill the frame with the person and what they're doing. So for me, the 500 really, we actually did an ATS on this, Hakan, maybe a couple months ago. There's a ATS where Charlie and I kind of go back and forth on 3 different lenses, and we were on the beach at the Pistol River down in Southern Oregon shooting kiteboarding, and we traded around with the 24 to 200, the new Z lens, and the 70 to 200 2.8 Z lens, and then the 500 PF on an adapter. And my response at the end of it was like, give me the 500 every time for this particular activity.
Yeah. While we're on the lens subject, Colleen, who is a D800 shooter and has the 14 to 24 and the 19 millimeter tilt shift, she's contemplating going mirrorless and wanted to see if any comments about the newer one, the S, the 14 to 24 versus the 19 millimeter tilt shift. You don't have the tilt shift, do you?
No, I don't. I worked with tilt shift with the actual view camera with a 4x5 back in the day. And I've done a couple of tilt adapters. I'm always frustrated by the way the modern tilt shift lenses work. And I'm sure Colleen, doing a lot of architectural work, is really good with that lens. You know, unlike the view cameras and an adapter that my good friend John Eastcott made, and it never has been mass produced, sadly. It's fiddly because you get your focus where you want it, and then you do your tilt, and all of a sudden the focus gets thrown out, and you got to do this back and forth process. It's a long, painstaking kind of architectural style thing. I mean, the new 14 to 24 Nikon S, I haven't used the Sony 12 to 24, but this new 14 to 24 is sort of my dream ultra wide lens. I love it. It's sharp edge to edge. There's almost no chromatic aberration. It's like got a lot less distortion than you'd expect. But if architecture is your thing, you know, there's no possible way to shoot a big tall building without tilting up some and creating some keystoning. And I mean, if you really are proficient with the tilt shift, it's going to be tough to replace that capability just for that specific thing in architecture where you're keeping all your lines straight.
Will that tilt shift lens, should it work with the adapter, or is that an older lens?
Well, it should work with the adapter. I haven't heard that it does. I should probably research that a little tighter, but I mean, most of the high-end lenses, I mean, if it has a built-in autofocus motor, it'll autofocus. If it doesn't, you can still manually focus it. I mean,
I believe they're manual focus.
I think they're manual focus anyway. The adapter is great. I mean, none of my lenses have any problem on that adapter, and the only ones I've heard of having any problems, it's mainly that they don't autofocus with some of the cheaper old autofocus lenses that didn't have built-in motors. The camera doesn't have an autofocusing motor; it relies on the lens to do that. That's the complaint people have, but it works just fine. I mean, if you think about it, it's literally just a tube that the electronics are flowing through to just set it out further away from the body. It's not complicated to make that work well. So
that distance from that longer distance from the flange won't affect the tilt though, the tilt shift? No? Okay.
I mean, you're still you're still, by setting it out with the adapter, you're just moving it out to the same distance it would be in the DSLR. It's just replacing the mirror box. So it's going to be in the same distance away from the sensor that it would be on a DSLR. That's what the adapter does.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, we've got a bunch of Z questions, and we've got a bunch of printer questions. So I think what I'm going to try and do, so we had a couple of questions from people about paper types. What was that?
No, I was just, should we go back and forth? No, but yeah, paper type. Let's go paper type.
You know, Sherry asked, you know, do we have a favorite paper type for black and white images? She says she knows it's a subjective personal choice. Just want to know what you prefer and why. We have a couple. Steve also asked about that. Go-to printing substrates for genres such as wildlife, landscape, abstracts. And Don has a question. Don has a question just about the general cost of ink and whether he should just give up and start using a lab. So on the paper types, it really is a subjective thing. I mean, Hudson and I, as much as we're similar in many ways, he and I are completely different in terms of what we print on.
Yep.
You know,
although if I'm printing black and white or a foggy scene or something that doesn't have vivid color and super high dynamic contrast, I love to print on the mats like you do too.
Yeah, I mean, I print mostly on the fine art papers. Mm-hmm. Red River has some really nice sort of cotton-based papers. You know, Epson's hot press and cold press papers are nice, but actually their old ultra smooth fine art paper is what I've been buying that up wherever I can find stock in it, because it really is one of my favorite papers. You know, basically you've got, you know, your RC papers, which are the glossy and the luster stuff that you know, were around in the old days of film. You've got your Barita, and fiber type based sort of glossy type papers, and then you've got your fine art media, which it's right. Well,
it's got a texture.
Which ones?
The burritos.
Yes, but they're all over the map. I mean, you can get semi-gloss gloss. You can get matte finishes. The thing is that choosing paper can be absolutely daunting, which is why you want to buy sample packs. And most of the printer companies, there's Moab, there's Red River, there's Legacy, you know, and then you get Epson and other guys. The best thing to do is to buy sample packs. Or what I tend to do is I buy letter size boxes of papers that I'm interested in from whomever. I cut them in half and I do test prints with them. You know, so I'm not wasting a lot of paper. You know, when I'm printing on a sheet of 17 by 22 inch paper, you know, that's expensive, and I want to make sure that the image that I'm printing is worth it. So, you know, I mean, there's so many different paper types that it's really hard to say other than going and playing. And the problem then becomes then printing is even more expensive because you're using more ink. So, you know, printing is not for the faint of the heart. You know, you really have to want to print. You know, you want to have a print. You want to take part in that process. Otherwise, you know, you really are, once you've got a calibrated system, you know, sending off to a lab that you like is probably the best way to go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, printing is a complete new art. It's different than your photography. It's different than your photography editing. It's a whole new can of worms that's really fun and very, very fulfilling, but it's not a cost-saving exercise or a time-saving exercise. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes time to get good at, and you're going to waste ink, and you're going to waste paper, and you're going to eventually find that the smaller cheaper printers tend to be less cost effective than the bigger, more sort of professional high-end printers. And it really is a labor of love and a great printing lab. You know, my favorite's Bay Photo, but there are many good ones. They'll do a fantastic job for you. They'll work with you. They'll do color correction. They'll make sure things look good. You know, if you work with a good calibrated monitor and send them off images, you'll get great results. I think from a straight up paper perspective, if people are asking though, you know, for Epson, I print a lot of my big landscapes and things I'm going to mount on a substrate. If I'm going to mount it on Sintra or on aluminum or something like that, I print it on their premium luster paper. It doesn't feel great. It feels kind of like plastic, but it's got this nice textured luster and it has a really, really dark blacks, really, really bright whites. It's a little bit warm and it's very durable and it's, you know, affordable. If I'm printing something and I want someone to hold that beautiful piece of paper and they're going to mount it, and you know, I just want that great feel. I like Ilford gold fiber silk for my you know, beautiful feeling print that has really, really deep dynamic range and
see, I can't stand that paper anymore.
I like it's tough to work with. It's hard to work with, but it is
very hard to work with. Yeah,
hard to work with, but it's got a really beautiful result. And then, you know, I used a lot of Hahnemuhle's matte papers in the past, and I like a lot of those matte papers. Moab makes a lot of beautiful papers. What's your favorite matte paper to work with, Rick?
Like I said, the ultra smooth fine art paper is my favorite. And then if I'm printing something where I want some gloss to it, my go-to is Epson's Exhibition Fiber. They have some newer papers that I like. They have one called Fiber, which is a matte-based paper, and I've been spending a fair amount of time this year printing with it, and I like it a lot. It is expensive though, and I'm just not sure it's worth it at this point. You know,
that's like Exhibition Fiber. I feel like the if I'm going to mount it, which I do a lot of, you know, I got this big print back behind me mounted on Ultra board, and if it's going to be mounted, I don't notice the biggest difference up on the wall between Exhibition Fiber and luster. The difference is that it's, you know, $400 a roll for the Exhibition Fiber and $150 a roll for the luster. But if I'm going to hold on to it, yes, Exhibition Fiber has that gold fiber silk wonderful feel to it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful and just a nice thing to hold.
What?
Oh no, I was going to say, are we anything else on printing, or should we?
I think a couple of these we might actually send an email out to folks, some of the more specific questions.
Right.
All right. So there's a bunch of these questions, the Nikon questions are, you know, it's still that, you know, are the twos better than the ones? Should I be upgrading? Should I be looking at a Z7 versus a Z6? You know, I think that's kind of the big one. People are talking about, you know, what lenses to use and things like that. And then there's a couple of sort of XQD and CF Express questions.
Yeah, let me talk really briefly. I think that the Z6 II and the Z7 II solved some of the issues with the original Z6 and Z7. That if you like to shoot action in sports, they're just faster. It's faster the frame rate's really fast. The moving your subject tracking box around on the screen is lightning quick. The processing's fast. You've got a really deep buffer. Everything just feels faster, and the autofocus is a bit faster. The tracking is just better. The eye detect for people is crazy. Like I find it nearly impossible to get an image with someone's eyes out of focus unless I've got too slow a shutter speed. That's a different way. If you're just thinking about coming from a DSLR to a mirrorless, whatever brand it is you're working with, you kind of have to think about things a little differently than you have in the past. You know, with a With a DSLR, you're using an optical autofocus system where you really have to direct the point, and then, you know, maybe you catch your subject and then the camera will keep tracking it through the AF points. With the new cameras, often they find the subject for you. If you start learning to just kind of trust them, it's like adaptive cruise control in the new cars. It takes you a minute to get used to the fact that, wow, it really is braking for me and slowing down and keeping me the exact distance from the car ahead of me. I find myself using the auto area autofocus in these cameras almost exclusively for things that are moving. And, you know, 8 times out of 10, it nails the subject that I want it to nail and has it dead in focus. And if it doesn't, I have it set to just hit that function button and upbox a little subject tracking box, and I just move that onto my subject or shift my composition and hit the AF on button and lock, and then it'll keep that little box in focus. You can shoot almost everything that way, and it works really, really well. When it comes to Z6 versus Z7, the Z7 is a wonderful landscape camera. You know, it just has a lot of megapixels, a lot of resolution. And if you're going to be on a tripod, you can keep the ISO down. It's going to give you fantastic results that are eminently enlargeable, or in good light, say you're handheld shooting action and things, you can crop in a ton with all those megapixels, as long as your lens is capable of performing up to 46 megapixel standards. The Z6 is really, really great in low light, and I set my max ISO to 20,000, and I find with a little bit of noise reduction, I can get beautiful images at 20,000 ISO. You know, I don't know that I would print them, you know, 4 feet wide, but for most purposes and up to, you know, 11 by 17, but they'd look great. And they're certainly wonderful for sharing on the internet and those kinds of things. With a little noise reduction, you get wonderful images at really high ISO. So it makes it kind of the knock around camera that you want in your hand all the time. I really like the 24 megapixel sensor as a kind of standard stock, because you know, the more pixels you pack on a square millimeter of sensor, the more noise you get when you turn up the gain. When you turn up the ISO, you're amplifying that light signal that the sensor's bringing in, and it just gets noisier when you're trying to pack too many megapixels into the same real estate. So it really depends on your purpose. I mean, I find myself using the Z6 II more than the Z7, but if I'm in beautiful light or doing landscape, yeah, I'd like to use the Z7. It makes the Z6 a better astro camera if you're not using a star tracker. If you're using a star tracker, that kind of nullifies that, because you're not having to ramp up the ISO to keep that exposure time down. You can shoot it at 800 ISO. So those are my kind of basic points on that. I think there's a lot of questions about Compact Flash Express versus XQD. Let's just say that XQD is faster than SD cards, period. You know, it's just a very, very fast format. And but it never really took off that much. Sony used it in its professional video cameras, and Nikon started putting it in its high-end DSLRs to just get a bigger buffer, faster frame rate with faster processing. But it didn't take over. They're far more durable, they're more reliable. And now the Compact Flash Express B standard has a new data throughput method. It uses a PCI method, and it's faster. It's dual channel with the B cards, the ones that look like XQD cards, where they're single channel on the ones that they're making like SD cards, so they're half as fast. The ones that look like XQD cards are very, very fast, like 1700 megabytes a second. I shoot a bunch of video and I'll have 100 gigabytes on my card, and I watch the line transfer on my computer just in front of my eyes while I take a sip. It's amazing. And it lets these cameras have a bigger buffer than new Z6 II and Z7 II, because it's writing so fast to that XQD card, or the Compact Flash Express card. The only problem with Compact Flash Express is that it's a really new standard. And even if you have XQD cards, you're gonna have to buy a new reader to read it, because your XQD reader won't interface with them. It won't read them. And if you have an older camera like the D850 or the D500 that's through firmware been enabled to read and write to CF Express cards, you're still not going to get that speed bump, because the camera was designed to work with XQD. So it's maybe maxing out at 800 megabytes a second. You're not going to double that by putting a Compact Flash Express card in, but you're kind of future-proofing yourself for the next camera purchase, because that camera probably will take advantage of that speed, and you'll want that in the future. So it's kind of like, it's nice of them to retrofit the old cameras so that you don't have to keep buying something that's going to be an obsolete format. The one other little thing I'll say for PC users buying CF Express cards, I'm going to do a video on this really soon, a little quick tip video. But if you plug a compact flash express card right now into a PC, it doesn't light up. You have to go into the disk management. You right click the start button and go into disk management, and you have to right click that drive. It sees it as a bare SSD drive. You have to right click it and assign it a drive letter. And you have to do that every time you format it, because Windows just hasn't gotten around to saying this device is a memory card. So with Apple, it plugs in and it's right there on the desktop. Any other stuff that I didn't cover about the Z cameras and CF Express?
Philippe is asking about, he's got a Z7 and he's using the older 70 to 300 with the FTZ adapter, and it's just he'd like a 300 millimeter zoom or larger lens for the Z7, but he's not sure if and when something's going to come out. And he's just wondering about springing for the S 70 to 200 2.8 and the teleconverter. Would that be?
It's interesting. I think that they have on the roadmap a 100 to 400 coming, and I'll bet it's going to be fantastic. I think the 70 to 200 with the 1.4 is pretty phenomenal. Even with the 2.0, it's pretty great. Our good friend Charlie has been using both of those teleconverters and sending me samples. I haven't shot with it myself, but I've been looking at his samples, and he did some little tests for me shooting some siding, some cedar siding, and the results are great, better than I've ever gotten from a 2.0 with the old 70 to 200. But given what you're saying and what you're used to, I mean, it might make sense to just use the FTZ until the 100 to 400 comes out, because that might be the lens that you just love to have. For me, I like having the 70 to 200 for portraits and those kind of extractive landscape shots, and then I like having the 500 for wildlife and things like that. But that's, it's not in everybody's cards to tote that around or spend that much money on those two lenses. So I think that you'll certainly get great quality with either the 1.4 or the 2.0 teleconverter. You'll get quality. You can't even see a reduction in sharpness and image quality with the 1.4, and that gets you suddenly to a 10. What is it? A 10? No, about what, 85 to 280 or something like that. So it's a thought, but it's expensive. And I would imagine that the 100 to 400 will be cheaper than the 70 to 200 2.8. I don't know that for sure, but maybe a little bit cheaper.
Okay. Well, I think, there are other questions left, but we're kind of out of time at this point. So, what are you there? You want to take us out, or?
Well, I saw James just asked where the video on using the Nikon ES2 is. It's last week's Approaching the Scene. So if you go to YouTube, it's up at the top of my YouTube channel. You can find it right there.
Just thanks, everyone. Next session is January 5th. The sign up is open. I posted it in the chat. Feel free to jump on hudsonhenry.com/office hours and register. Submit your question. We're talking about long exposure for about half the time. Then we'll take some questions at the end. Otherwise, cool. Have a safe and happy holiday, and we'll see you next time.
All right, guys. Thanks, everybody, so much. And special thanks to Rick and Woody and Darren and David. Appreciate it. All right, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in January. We'll see you next year. Bye, guys. Happy holidays. Stay safe.